Deputy John Brady, are you sharing time?
No, full 30 minutes.
You have 30 minutes.
Thanks,
Thank
Catherine. Firstly, can I just say, I'm not going to take lectures from a deputy from a party that brought this country to its knees, and contrary to the spin he comes in here and says that they lifted all of social welfare recipients out of the poverty trap, and to use his word, even marginally. Let the record show, and I'll read the list for the record of the House, that this party, that this deputy represents, Fianna Fáil, the partitionist party, mind you, that states that the 6 counties is not part of this country. So not only is he a hypocrite, he's also a member of a partitionist party. But can I just say clearly, for the record, that this is the party that targeted the blind, the deaf, the disabled. They halved job seekers for under 20s to €100. You've cut the minimum wage. You've cut maternity benefit. You cut the student support grants. You introduced prescription charges. You cut carers' allowance and carers' benefit.
Without interruption, please.
You removed the Christmas bonus. You reduced rent supplement. You closed the back-to-work allowance for new recipients, and you also cut child benefit. So, contrary to lifting social welfare recipients out of the poverty trap.
Can I stop you for a moment, Deputy? Deputy O'Dea, you must allow Deputy Brady without interruption. You have your 30 minutes.
Thank you, Catherine. So, contrary to the spin that they lifted social welfare recipients out of the poverty trap, they actually compounded them further and further and deeper into poverty. And the Deputy is right. We had a presentation in relation to lone parents, and he would know clearly that lone parents, one of the groups in which he comes in here and cries crocodile tears over, that those children who live in a lone parent family, 22.1% of those live in a constant state of poverty. Thank you very much to your party of Fianna Fáil. Thank you very much. So, to set the Deputy, set the record straight. So, after the budget and during a prime-time debate, Minister Noonan listed all of the similarities between Fine Gael and indeed Fianna Fáil, saying, and to quote, "We both share common policy objectives, we both come from much the same background, and we are both supported by much the same people across the country." It was a bit like an awkward conversation between a married couple where one partner justifies to the other all the reasons why they are meant to be together. Minister Noonan did leave out a number of points on what makes Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil 2 peas in a pod. There are many more similarities to add to Minister Noonan's list, clearly evident from Budget 2017. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have utter contempt for young people. Across the board, every social welfare recipient will see a €5 increase in their payment, except for those under 26 years of age. Those on job seekers aged 18 to 24 will receive, and sorry, Catherine, I hope you're stopping the clock here, because the heckling here and the truth obviously has touched the raw nerve. And sorry, Catherine, every time I come in here and remind Fianna Fáil of what they have implemented and imposed on people right across the board, they react like this, Catherine. So I'm asking you to stop, Deputy O'Dea, and let me speak uninterrupted.
Deputy Brady, I've on numerous occasions asked him to stop. I would ask you to address the Chair, and there's a reason for a Chair being here. I will chair this debate.
Well, please do chair it. Please do chair it.
And I will be you know I'm one of the fairest people in the Chair.
Absolutely.
And I have asked Deputy not to interrupt you. So please, you address the Chair and continue your script.
Thank you, Catherine. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have utter contempt for young people. Across the board, every social welfare recipient will see a €5 increase in their payment, except for those under 26 years of age. Those on job seekers aged 18 to 24 will receive an increase of €2.70, and those aged 25 will receive an increase of €3.80. So instead of struggling to live on €100 per week, Those aged 18 to 24 will now struggle on €102.70. Why? Because of their age. These increases were hardly surprising coming from Minister Varadkar, who struggles to even comprehend how any young person is on a job seeker's payment in the first place. Minister Varadkar has made his feelings towards young people crystal clear. The full rate of job seekers is far too generous for our young people. The Minister has also voiced his confusion that young people coming into Ireland from foreign shores with poor English and poor qualifications are taking up employment in a matter of weeks. Yet the young Irish cannot seem to do the same. In the Minister's own words, when there are lots and lots of jobs, apparently. Not content with running thousands of our young people out of the country when they purposely cut job seekers in the first place, Fianna Fáil have played a part in ensuring that the discrimination for our young people that they started in 2009 continues. And while Fianna Fáil have since come out in a pretense outrage at the increase and vowed to reverse it, it's a bit late in the day for Fianna Fáil to be coming out crying crocodile tears at the tiny increase for our job seekers, having been part of negotiating the budget themselves, and ultimately they can take responsibility for this in the bill. Unlike most of what Fianna Fáil has done since the last election, with numerous U-turns, their message for young people has certainly remained consistent. Live on your €100 a week and be grateful, or leave the country. I assume that this is one of the shared common policy objectives both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael hold. Sinn Féin welcome the increase to the Back to Education allowance for job seekers aged under 26 to the full new rate of €193. However, the fact that those on Back to Education allowance do not qualify for the maintenance component of the student grant, Susie, this amount is simply not sustainable to get a young person through a 3 or 4 year course. For many young people, returning to college also means having to move to access a college course. This would mean additional costs that the Back to Education allowance will simply not cover. I do not think it was anticipated that the government could possibly make life any more difficult for lone parents, but along with Fianna Fáil and their shared common policy objectives, this was made possible. The single biggest issue for lone parents remains the reduction in the cut-off age for the one-parent family payment, the 7 years of age, and this has not been addressed in the bill. While on one hand the government reforms were said to be implemented as an incentive to encourage lone parents into employment, there was no increase in the in-work support family income supplement for lone parents. Many parents, therefore, on FIS will now be better off transferring back onto the job seekers payment. It has been well documented that the lone parent reforms have had the perverse effect of encouraging welfare dependency and reducing household income. A recent report undertaken by UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre, NUI Galway, has echoed this fact. Their research has concluded that the policy has left lone parents in paid employment being financially worse off. The government seemed to ignore the blatant fact that the capacity of a lone parent to work and care is not equal to that of a two-parent family. Lone parents are unable to partake in full-time employment when they are a child's sole carer. On the other hand, they are locked out of accessing childcare due to the lack of availability and huge costs. The promise of pushing in place the Scandinavian childcare model on the back of the lone parent reforms is nothing but a memory, and a distant memory for this government. The difficulties with cost and availability of childcare have been repeatedly acknowledged as an issue of concern for those parenting alone returning to paid employment. OECD analysis indicates that full-time daycare for 2 preschool children is 40% of the family income for an Irish lone parent on an average income. in comparison to the OECD average of 13%. The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission report have already recommended that the state reverse the reforms to the one-parent family in the absence of an adequate and affordable childcare system being in place. Perhaps ignoring this call is also part of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's shared common policy objective. Back to education and training is another option posed by the government to lone parents, but yet again, this cannot be accessed without proper childcare. This government still needs to get their heads around that fact, that without affordable childcare, getting lone parents back to work isn't a reality. The end to the farce that was JobBridge has been announced on numerous occasions, including as far back as May the 1st, and I welcome that fact, and I welcome the reduction in the funding for JobBridge as part of Budget 2017 as a clear signal of abolishing it. However, it is concerning that Minister Varadkar has been unable to provide details on the new scheme now that JobBridge is closed to new applicants. The serious concerns highlighted in the Department's own audit of JobBridge cannot be allowed to continue in the replacement scheme, and JobBridge 2.0 will not cut it. We need a total root and branch reform. I have outlined previously Sinn Féin have put forward a credible alternative to JobBridge, and I urge the Minister to have a look at that and take on board the real alternative to getting our young people back into the workforce. The new annual €500 cost of education allowance for parents and lone parents in receipt of back to education allowance is not in fact new. The previous cost of education allowance payment was abolished in 2013, again without access to affordable childcare and without access to the maintenance part of the SUSI grant. Returning to education is not a sustainable option for lone parents. Another huge issue impacting on lone parents is that of child maintenance, and the fact that the onus is on the lone parents themselves to seek maintenance from an ex-partner. On one hand, we have the Department issuing letters to the liable relative informing them that they are no longer obliged to pay maintenance once their child reaches the age of 7. On the other hand, the Department are telling lone parents that if they do not seek maintenance, that they will receive financial sanctions. The Department are putting lone parents in an impossible and sometimes a very, very dangerous position in this regard, and that must end, Minister. For both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, lone parents do not feature, and the fact that Minister Varadkar has not even bothered to respond to the UNESCO report further enforces this reality. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil both made commitments before the election and then to dump them once they were elected. Both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael pledged to increase the living alone allowance on an annual basis in their respective election manifestos. Yet this increase was simply nowhere to be seen in Budget 2017. Older people who live alone are amongst the most vulnerable in our society, and many of them rely solely on their state pension for income, yet they face the same increased cost of living as all other households. We know that additional charges placed on older people, such as the family home tax, water charges, the increased prescription charges that Fianna Fáil first introduced, and they have placed a huge burden on our older people living alone. Fianna Fáil, as I said, introduced the prescription charges for medical card holders back in 2010, and Fine Gael have kept them in place. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have no shame whatsoever in targeting those who are sick and weak in our society. Neither party, another raw nerve touched, another raw nerve. Every time I touch a raw nerve, this is the reaction.
Sorry, Deputy Brady, I must ask you not to interrupt him.
No, you're not.
Neither party are concerned that we have people out there picking and choosing what medication they can do without week to week something else that both parties have in common. While Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil both acknowledge fuel poverty, and indeed Deputy O'Dea mentioned it in his contribution, they have failed ultimately to introduce or reintroduce any cuts or turn about any of the cuts that were imposed on fuel allowance. It is staying exactly the same as last year. And currently there are 28% of households across the state experiencing fuel poverty. And that means we have older people who are cold in their homes as we sit here this evening. And we know that Ireland has the highest levels of excess winter mortality anywhere in Europe, with an estimated 2,800 excess deaths every single winter. Yet Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have failed to address it in Budget 2017. The reality on the ground is that older people are having to travel on public transport day in, day out, simply to keep warm. They are rationing fuel at home because they cannot afford to keep the fire lighting or the fuel or the heating turned on, and they are having to go to bed early simply to stay warm. Recently I met a lady, I was actually during the election campaign, and she has to go into the local library to keep warm. And in there she meets a lot of other elderly people from the community. And this is happening the length and breadth of the state. Our elderly are having to go into public buildings to try keep warm because of the gross inadequacy in the fuel allowance, the cuts that have been implemented, and the fuel poverty that 28% of our population are experiencing. And this is totally and utterly unacceptable, and Budget 2017 does absolutely nothing in that regard. But due to the inaction of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, this is set to continue. There was such a song and dance about the €5 increase in the state pension, but when we look at the fine print, we realise that older people won't actually see an increase until 5 months after the budget, a date that has been unknown until this bill was published last week. So, while it is acknowledged that older people need this increase, the message from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael is simply they will have to wait. And the bill fails to address all of the huge inconsistencies that exist within our pension system. Currently, we have the most bizarre ongoing situation where 65-year-olds are being forced onto a job seeker's payment on retirement. And this was the consequence of abolishing the transitional state pension. The only income available to those who are obliged to retire at 65 years of age is a job seeker's payment. And the Department are not interested in whether or not these people are actively seeking employment, which is the main criteria for receipt of such a payment. They just want 65-year-olds to quietly take the job seeker's payment for the year, and then they can draw down the old age pension. And in many cases, we are talking about a person retiring at 65 who has worked maybe 40 or 50 years, who have diligently paid their pension contributions and who are now being told that they simply cannot access their pension for a full year. As of April this year, there were more 65-year-olds in receipt of job seekers' payments than any other age category in the country. That's 5,075 65-year-old men and women across the state. In recent weeks, a lady made contact with my office in relation to this matter. Her late husband was forced onto job seekers on retirement. He had worked his entire life, and for him, signing on caused him frustration and massive amounts of distress. And this lady told me how the department had instructed her late husband not to leave the country on holidays for any lengthy periods or he would lose his payment. Bearing in mind, he was 65, he was retired. And the couple had hoped to visit their children and grandchildren in Australia, a country which is difficult to visit for a short 2-week stay. Yet the department dictated what this man could and could not do. This situation caused huge distress to the man on his retirement. He did not want to be made feel he was to receive payment for no work on job seekers. On retirement, he was made feel that he was supposed to be seeking work, while at the same time he was restricted when it came to visiting his family abroad. That is only the case of many. Forcing 65-year-olds onto a job seeker's payment will not sustain the state pension system. It does not work, and it leaves older people at a financial disadvantage, receiving €64 less than they would on the state pension. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil saw no need to address that whatsoever in the social welfare bill. Women are also bearing the brunt of the changes made to the state's contributory pension scheme by Fine Gael. When it comes to retirement, the gender pension gap between men and women is 35%. The number of PRSI contributions needed to receive the state pension remains at 520, which was significantly increased from 260 in 2012. The primary reason for the inequality in the pension cuts is that women had taken time out of work to rear their children, or were forced out of jobs due to the marriage bar. Yet, despite inequality for women, neither Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil saw the need to address women's pensions in Budget 2017 and consequently in this bill. Those with disabilities will see a €5 increase in their payments. Yet, the promise of a new motorised transport grant remains just that, a promise with no action. 3.5 years after a commitment from the Taoiseach in this very chamber, there remains no replacement whatsoever. Transport costs are cited again and again as expensive and difficult to manage. Those with disabilities cannot be left to wait another 3 or 4 years for this to be replaced. It is not enough to give those with disabilities an extra fiver and leave it at that. Those with disabilities need to be encouraged and given the same opportunities as others to avail of full paid employment. And we see this done fantastically through projects such as WalkPair and the work they do in supporting young people with disability into the workforce. I welcome the fact that €2 million will be provided for projects which provide pre-activation supports for people with disabilities in 2017. However, we need to know where this money is going, and we need to get the detail on that. Minister, we have asked repeatedly as to whether projects such as WalkPair, which is really at wit's end now. The funding is running out. They do not know what is happening next year. They are a fantastic organisation, done fantastic work for young people with disabilities, getting them back into the workforce. And yourself and the Minister for Disabilities has literally abdicated their responsibility and failed to give groups like this the answers and the certainty that they know. I welcome the fact that there is €2 million, but we need clarity as to where exactly that money is going. When it comes to children, I welcome the increases in the school meals programme, especially given the huge issue of child poverty experienced by families on a daily basis. It is not news that parents are struggling to feed their children, to provide a warm home for their children and to provide sufficient clothing for their children. It is a stark reality for people out there. One measure that does not appear in this bill is any increase to the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance. And this is a missed opportunity, Minister. Time and time again, as September approaches, voluntary organisations are left to pick up the tab due to the government's inaction on children out there, and the struggle for parents to cover these costs on a year-to-year basis will continue unless there is an increase in the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance. And I'm sorry to see that mine and others' calls for the government to increase this has gone ignored again. Sinn Féin welcomes the provision of the paternity leave and benefit. We welcomed and supported this bill when it was brought forward ahead of the summer recess. It was something that Sinn Féin had called for consistently, and it is a welcome start in developing Ireland's parental leave practices. Also to be welcomed in this bill is the extension of access to certain social welfare benefits for self-employed, including farmers. This again is a welcome first step in providing security for those who are self-employed if and when they may actually need it. The unchanged rate of PRSI for the self-employed is also to be welcomed. We know that the self-employed have seen little or no support from government throughout the recession, and in many cases a number of businesses unfortunately did not survive. We must support those who take a risk in setting up their own business and taking on employees, and I hope to see a further rollout of social protection measures for the self-employed going forward. Year on year, Sinn Féin provide a fully comprehensive alternative to the budget, which is fully costed by the department. And in this we addressed head-on real issues that the most vulnerable in society face on an annual basis. A social welfare bill brought forward by Sinn Féin would look very, very different to the one that we are debating here this evening. Sinn Féin would not stand over the discrimination in our social welfare system when it comes to our young people. In our alternative budget, we included a €40 increase in the job seekers' payments for the under-26s as part of its restoration over 2 budgets. We also included the increase to the Back to Education allowance for the under-26s to the full rate, and we also welcome the fact that the government have done that. For lone parents, we included an increase of 10% on FIS and an increase in the cut-off age for one-parent family to 12 years of age as a starting point, eventually over the next budget to restore it to its former levels. And these measures would have directly targeted lone parents and some way address the issues they face on a daily basis. When it comes to older people, Sinn Féin brought forward an older persons package worth over €410 million, including a 3-week extension to the fuel allowance, a €9.50 increase in the living alone allowance, reinstating the transitional pension for 65-year-olds, as well as further measures to address the inconsistencies within our pension system. For those with disabilities, we proposed an increase of €5.50 in the disability allowance and the blind pension. And with that, we also allocated €1.1 million to secure and replicate the Work Peer programme, which supports young people on disability allowance to move into paid positions of employment, into the open market and further education or training in mainstream settings. The coming together of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil has done one thing well. It has allowed them to see that they are in fact both the same. Of course, this does not come as news for many of us. Approaching this social welfare bill and following on from the budget, we have seen 2 things. Fine Gael carrying the can for the continuing of measures imposed by Fianna Fáil before them, and Fianna Fáil throwing their own party policies out the window and chasing after Fine Gael in every single thing they do. And the marriage of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil does work. It works for the developers, it works for bankers, it works well for the wealthy in society. It works for those who inherit rich estates and inheritance, and it works well for the ministers and the government, not forgetting their own pay increases. But let us be very clear, the marriage of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil does not work for the ordinary people out there. It does not work for young people, it does not work for lone parents. It does not work for our older citizens, and it certainly does not work for people with disabilities, and certainly not children. The social welfare bill in its present form does not do everything it could have done. It is the result of a budget that further marginalises our young people, lone parents and those living alone. As the main opposition party here, there is little room for Sinn Féin to bring forward amendments to this bill, given the fact that as an opposition party we cannot table amendments that constitute a charge on the Exchequer or on the public. Having said that, it is my full intention to frame amendments in such a way as to bypass the restrictions so that a proper debate can take place on the many issues that should have been within this bill. So I look forward to it being debated at committee level, at committee stage. Certainly we will be putting forward a number of amendments. And I think it's important, as I started off my contribution here this evening, that the record has been set straight, that the hot air that is blown into this chamber by Fianna Fáil, that the record has been set straight, that they compounded the poverty levels of the very people that they are in here talking about trying to lift out of the poverty trap.
Thank you.